After serving less than half of a 53-month prison sentence for burglary, Florida man Justin Giambanco was granted early release in October of 2022. The 31-year-old, described as a career criminal, quickly resumed the patterns of behavior that led to him racking up over 20 felonies and misdemeanors on his criminal record before his 30th birthday. On April the 20th of 2023, the police in Palm Bay responded to a home on the 2700 block of Palm Drive Northeast, where they found a 69-year-old man dead. The victim's son had come upon his body strewn over a TV that had been thrown face down on the floor. His hands had been tied and bound with a USB cable, and he'd suffered a large laceration to the neck. Investigators found a blood-covered kitchen knife next to his body. Giambanco was linked to the violent crime after officers found a cell phone underneath the victim's body that reportedly belonged to the repeat offender. As Palm Bay authorities subsequently made efforts to locate Giambanco, they learned that he was already in the custody of Melbourne police in connection with an unrelated burglary. Upon searching the suspect's vehicle, law enforcement found a handgun of the same caliber as ammunition found at the Palm Drive crime scene, suggesting he and the victim had struggled over the firearm. There were also a pair of bloody sneakers which investigators believed were worn by Giambanco during the deadly home invasion. His resulting murder charge was added to the lengthy list of offenses he'd committed in the months following his early release from prison. On April the 15th, the woman he'd been staying with had kicked him out of the house, but he refused to leave. When the police got involved, Giambanco maintained his defiance, leading to an altercation with a Brevard County deputy. He was also implicated in several nearby burglaries. Giambanco faced a litany of new charges, including trespassing, battering a police officer, second-degree murder with a firearm, false imprisonment, grand theft with a firearm, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The Palm Bay police chief described the man as pure evil and also contended that his latest string of violent crimes wouldn't have transpired if he'd been required to serve out his entire prison sentence. Number 6. Michael Pent. A man known on the streets of Marion County, Florida as Zipperface, due to his distinctive facial tattoos, was arrested for assaulting his girlfriend in February of 2021. Sheriff's deputies had been dispatched to the Stage Top Motel, where they encountered the suspect, 21-year-old Michael Pent, as well as his partner of 2 months. The woman told law enforcement that she and Pent had been in the motel lobby when he asked to use her phone. She said they needed to go back to the room to charge the device first, at which point Pent flew into an unhinged rage. He began screaming and pushed his girlfriend, who subsequently fled into the parking lot. Pent pursued, then started shoving her around and striking her. The man admitted his misdeeds to law enforcement and was arrested on charges of battery and violation of probation. It was the latest in a long string of arrests for Pent, who'd last faced legal troubles in connection with a vehicle theft at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Ocala a few months earlier. He and an accomplice identified as 22-year-old Zachary Allen Hamel drove the stolen car to Ocklawaha and parked it behind a residence in the 13,000 block of Highway 25. When the owner of the home saw the vehicle, he found it suspicious and contacted the police. After searching the property, officers found Hamel using the bathroom while Pent hid in the shower. They both faced grand theft auto charges following their subsequent arrest. Number 5. Lee Hazen Williamson. In September of 2012, a serial cross-dresser from California was arrested for baring his genitals to strangers, only a year after a similarly revealing incident on a county bus. Lee Hazen Williamson was the flasher identified in subsequent reports. The Austrian-born 57-year-old, whose occupation was listed as caregiver, was caught exposing himself while donning a floral top and bathing suit. The incident occurred at the dock of the Lakefront Chalet Motel in Lake County and was reported to the authorities by an eyewitness. Williamson was brought to the Lake County Jail and booked on a $50,000 bond. In May of the previous year, the man had allegedly boarded a county bus with a dress and wig on, then proceeded to expose himself to fellow passengers. He was ultimately convicted of indecent exposure in connection with the bus incident and was later detained again for failing to register as an offender. Number 4. Jennifer Carvajal. Early on April the 25th of 2021, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper clocked a Hyundai Elantra blazing down Interstate 4 in Tampa at speeds of up to 111 miles per hour. The officer, Sergeant Jason Moore, made a swift U-turn and gave chase with sirens blaring, eventually catching up to the speeding car near the exit to Mango Road. As he tried to overtake the vehicle, the young woman behind the wheel made a sudden, sharp right onto the road shoulder, sending the Elantra down a slope, then up an embankment. The vehicle subsequently struck a concrete light pole as well as a palm tree before overturning in the parking lot of a nearby car dealership. The accident sent 2 passengers hurtling from the Elantra's back seat, one of whom later died at the hospital. The only one of the car's 4 total occupants who'd been wearing a seat belt at the time of the crash was the driver, 24-year-old Jennifer Carvajal. She suffered only minor injuries, but at the hospital, officers noted her eyes were glassy, her words were slurred, and she had trouble staying awake. Medical tests confirmed that she was intoxicated with a blood alcohol level above the legal driving limit. Carvajal was arrested and charged with reckless driving involving a serious injury, DUI involving a serious injury, DUI manslaughter, driving without a license, and multiple counts of DUI property damage. After news of the deadly crash hit the airwaves, it emerged that Carvajal already had another DUI manslaughter conviction on her criminal record. A few weeks prior to her 17th birthday, in February of 2014, she'd driven her Lincoln Navigator straight through a red light before colliding with another vehicle, sending it careening into a pedestrian crossing sign. The other driver, 52-year-old Keith Allen Davis, lay bleeding and unconscious as Carvajal stumbled out of her wrecked Navigator and told a bystander, "I just got my learner's permit. I don't have insurance." Davis was eventually taken to Lakeland Regional Medical Center where he was pronounced dead. In Carvajal's vehicle, police found multiple empty cans of alcoholic drinks as well as an empty bottle of tequila. A few hours after the crash, her blood alcohol level tested above the legal limit. In the incident's wake, Carvajal pleaded no contest in adult court and was given a 5-year prison sentence to be followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to enroll in a residential treatment program. In connection with her second DUI, Carvajal contended that she hadn't in fact been the one driving, even though one of the other passengers identified her as such to Sergeant Moore at the scene. If convicted of her most recent charges, she could face a prison sentence of up to 40 years. Number 3. Cole Johnson. The police in Independence, Iowa, were called to the scene of a domestic dispute in the 800 block of 6th Avenue Southwest on April the 29th of 2023. Responding officers were told by neighbors that a woman had been going from house to house, knocking on front doors and asking residents for help. Law enforcement eventually tracked her down and discovered that she'd suffered apparent stab wounds, for which a neighbor had fixed a makeshift tourniquet to stem the bleeding. She was subsequently taken to a nearby hospital for treatment, but her injuries were reportedly deemed non-life-threatening. At the victim's residence, law enforcement came upon 29-year-old Cole Johnson, who was accused of inflicting the woman's injuries during a fight in the backyard. He was arrested on charges of willful injury causing bodily injury, first-degree harassment, and 3 counts of child endangerment. Johnson subsequently bonded out of jail, but found himself back in trouble with the law within a couple of weeks. On May the 10th of 2023, Independence police were called to the 300 block of 4th Street Southeast for a report of a family disturbance. Upon arrival, they encountered an uncooperative male suspect who was identified as Johnson. He threatened the officers with a knife and ultimately needed to be tased in order to be subdued and taken back into custody. The man consequently faced additional charges of assault against a peace officer with a dangerous weapon, domestic abuse assault, and interference with official acts. Today's topic was requested by River Parish. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Andres Quintana Martinez. Officers from the Anderson Police Department in California were called to a local business on February the 9th of 2023 after receiving reports of a man rolling around on the floor and shouting incoherently. The individual was identified as 40-year-old Andres Quintana Martinez, a habitual criminal offender who was already well known to Anderson law enforcement. In subsequent reports, it was detailed how Martinez had been arrested 20 times within the span of half a year for various crimes, including violent and drug-related offenses. For his latest documented incident, the man was charged with public intoxication, but in the preceding 6 months he'd also faced charges of resisting a peace officer, prowling, and felony obstruction of a peace officer, among others. Despite his lengthy rap sheet, Martinez was released from the Shasta County Jail the day after his most recent arrest. Anderson police subsequently released a statement addressing the concerns of local residents about repeat criminals such as Martinez being allowed back on the streets. They revealed that the Shasta County Jail had been forced to close an entire floor due to severe staff shortages, which led to a number of chronic offenders being released from custody. If you missed our earlier release on when dumb criminals go wrong, then we have that lined up for you right after number 1. Number 1. Tyrone Howard. The NYPD received reports of shots fired near a public housing development in East Harlem on the night of October the 21st of 2015. Officer Randolph Holder and his partner arrived at the scene at around 8:30 p.m., whereupon they spoke with a man who said that his bicycle had been stolen at gunpoint. The victim revealed that following the theft, the suspect had fled with a group of people along a footpath near the East River. An individual with a bike was subsequently located on a pedestrian overpass near the highway. When officers engaged the male suspect, he pulled out a firearm and started shooting. 33-year-old Holder was struck in the head with a bullet during the ensuing gunfight, after which the thief abandoned the bike and fled on foot. Having been shot in the leg, the suspect only made it a few blocks before he was caught and taken into police custody. Following a brief stint at the hospital, the man, identified as 30-year-old Tyrone Howard, was booked on murder, robbery, and weapons charges. Howard had reportedly been arrested a total of 28 times since he was 13, including for drug possession and robbery, and consequently had 2 previous stints in state prison. For Officer Holder's slaying, the career criminal, known on the streets as Peanut, was found guilty on all counts by a Manhattan jury. In April of 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8. Dana Johnson and Kiana Wilson. On December the 19th of 2018, Michigan women Dana Johnson and Kiana Wilson, aged 18 and 40 respectively, were stopped by loss prevention officers at a Target in Bloomfield Township. The duo had tried to walk away with a shopping cart containing roughly $1,900 in unpaid electronics, even though the store was filled with police officers at the time. The Bloomfield Township Police Department, along with Sylvan Lake, Kego Harbor, and Orchard Lake Police Departments, hosted a Shop with a Cop event. Over a dozen members of law enforcement were at the scene, helping underprivileged children choose gifts for their families. Johnson and Wilson had tried to pull the ill-fated theft only feet away from them. Predictably, security personnel asked for police support and the 2 women were arrested on felony retail fraud charges. The Kego Harbor Police Department posted about the incident on its Facebook, adding a tongue-in-cheek comment that a special episode of Dumb Criminal Minds was likely being filmed live in the store. Number 7. Brielle Marshall. Law enforcement in Albuquerque, New Mexico, spotted a young woman passed out behind the wheel of a Volkswagen that was parked in a trailer park driveway on February the 17th of 2017. An officer recorded the interaction that followed. Brielle Marshall started crying as she stepped out of the vehicle, with the officer trying to calm her down, later noting in a complaint that she had trouble standing and smelled of alcohol. Marshall was uncooperative during field tests and at one point decided to prove her sobriety by doing 2 cartwheels. The officer warned her that she'd face arrest if she didn't stop, but Marshall ignored him and went for a 3rd display of acrobatics that ended with her falling to the ground. According to the complaint, as the officer tried to resume the field test, Marshall kicked him in the groin. He wasn't hurt, while the intoxicated young woman was taken into custody on charges of battery, aggravated DUI, and driving with an expired license plate. Number 6. Jamie Lee Sharp. On January the 11th of 2015, Jamie Lee Sharp and James Honeywell, both in their mid-20s, burglarized a home in Gloucester, England. They stole a large television, a wallet, and other small items, in addition to the keys to a high-performance car. Sharp then started filming himself driving the vehicle, a Porsche Boxster, and called friends to brag about it. He told them to listen to the engine as he revved his supposed new car. Moments later, he lost control of the Porsche, crashed into a wall and became trapped in the wreck. Honeywell fled, while the emergency services later pulled an unconscious Sharp from the mangled vehicle. He recovered and was jailed for 4 years after he admitted offenses including burglary of the Porsche owner's home and aggravated vehicle taking. A sentencing judge called his bragging behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle an extremely unpleasant, aggravating feature of the case. Honeywell was also arrested, and his defense described him as acting under Sharp's influence before he was jailed for 35 months. The car theft was featured on an episode of the TV show Britain's Dumbest Criminals, which will eventually become the means of identification in another of Sharp's botched crimes. In 2017, while he was on parole for the previous theft, Sharp burglarized the home of Portia Shipway in Hardwick, near Gloucester. True to form, among other items, he also stole the woman's car, a Vauxhall Zafira. CCTV systems belonging to Shipway's neighbor captured good quality footage of Sharp in action. The woman shared them on social media, and users, some of whom had recognized the man from his appearance on the TV show, pointed to him as the culprit. Sharp was jailed for 4 years and 4 months after once again pleading guilty to burglary and vehicle theft. Number 5. Simon 2. Following a traffic incident that took place in July of 2019, a man in his late 20s was branded Australia's dumbest criminal prior to being sentenced to multiple years in prison. Simon 2 crashed his Toyota Hiace van into stationary cop cars in Sydney's Eastwood neighborhood. The collision was captured on CCTV, and one of the vehicles sustained heavy damage to its front, but 2 kept driving. When the police pulled him over about an hour later, the man told them that he'd been delivering food but was fidgeting and refused to meet the officer's eyes. He blamed microsleep for the earlier accident, but his behavior triggered suspicion, prompting a search of his vehicle. As law enforcement opened up the cardboard boxes in the back, one officer turned to the driver and said, "Someone isn't going to be happy. You know how much it's worth?" 2 simply replied, "A lot." It turned out that he'd been transporting over 570 pounds of crystal methamphetamine, worth close to $100 million. He was arrested in what was subsequently described as one of the easiest drug busts in the history of New South Wales police. 2's failings as a drug runner were even criticized by his own barrister, who described it as a shambolic and incompetent effort by a man who normally worked as a courier. 2 never offered much information about his employers, but it was reported that he'd resorted to transporting drugs as he was struggling with addiction and financial difficulties. He was eventually sentenced to 6 years and 6 months in prison and would have to serve 4 years before being eligible for parole. Number 4. Albert Bailey. In March of 2010, law enforcement in Connecticut reacted in amusement to what they described as a definitely unusual technique displayed by a bank-robbing duo who decided to phone in their heist. On the 23rd of the month, a man called a branch of the People's Bank in Fairfield, demanding that $100,000 in large bills be gathered for pickup. He threatened that a bloodbath would be carried out if the orders weren't obeyed, with one of the instructions being that no dye packs be included. Predictably, the bank worker on the other end hung up and immediately dialed 911. The building went on lockdown. While one of the robbers was already inside, he handed the teller a note while the employee was on the phone with the police, giving them a play-by-play of the situation inside. The robber collected $900 and asked to be let out, but patrol cars were already at the scene when he tried to make his escape. He fled on foot to a car where his accomplice was waiting. One of the men was identified as 27-year-old Albert Bailey, while the other, a teenager, wasn't named. Both were taken into custody without incident, and when one of them threw the bag of money on the ground, it exploded in dye. They were charged with first-degree robbery and threatening in the first degree. At the time, Bridgeport resident Bailey was on probation for another bank heist, which had occurred several years prior. Number 3. Silver Spring robbery attempt. A Maryland man called 911 in early January of 2022 to say that he'd heard rustling outside his Silver Spring home and that it was possibly being targeted by a robber. As reported by NBC Washington, the police arrived at the scene shortly after the call had been placed. At around 3:30 in the morning, law enforcement found no evidence of a break-in and subsequently left, but received a second call about an hour later, with the homeowner claiming he'd heard moaning inside his walls. Upon their return, the police found that the top of the chimney had been removed. Firefighters were called in for support when it became clear that a man had tried to rob the home by making his way inside through the chimney. In doing so, however, he'd gotten stuck. Neither the suspect nor homeowner was named, but photos and videos from inside the home showed rescuers' 90-minute-long extraction effort. Firefighters took out a piece of the fireplace wall, brick by brick, and then removed the would-be burglar through the resulting hole. The police escorted him to the hospital where he was treated for minor injuries before facing the consequences of his fumbled burglary attempt. Number 2. Candy Larkin. In August of 2022, a shop owner from Houston, Texas, followed a shoplifter home and confronted her, capturing the interaction in a video that later went viral on TikTok and other social media platforms. For roughly 5 years, Sophia Milan had owned the Erotic Cabaret Boutique, a small business that sold swimsuits, costumes, lingerie, and adult-only items. She'd been spending the day with her parents when her manager alerted her that a woman had stolen from the store. The suspected shoplifter, subsequently identified as Candy Larkin, had completely ignored the surveillance cameras, which recorded her placing items in her bag. She then got on a metro bus, with Milan's manager following suit. Upon hearing the news, Milan chased after the bus in her car and boarded it at the next stop. She sat next to Larkin before pulling out her phone. The latter appeared bewildered and uncomfortable with being filmed, but was otherwise calm as Milan loudly announced that she'd stolen from her. The business owner told the camera that she was going to follow Larkin home because she'd agreed to pay for the merchandise there. Milan looked through her purse and found items that included a schoolgirl skirt, a costume, bras, lubricant, and female stimulants, estimated at a combined $600. Larkin got off near Kirby, as did Milan and her manager. They followed her on foot while talking to the police, who eventually took the shoplifter into custody and charged her with misdemeanor theft. The description of the last video, which showed Larkin being arrested, read that the police had found more stolen products on her, which came from Banana Republic, Target, and Adam and Eve. As Milan's video went viral, other store owners contacted her and reported having had issues with Larkin. They even shared footage of her in the act, as the woman had repeated the same careless and callous behavior a number of times in the past. At the time of her theft at the boutique, she was actually on probation for a misdemeanor theft case from 2021 after she'd stolen 2 dresses from a Saks off 5th. Number 1. Matthew Allen McNelly and Joey Lee Miller. In the fall of 2009, a homeowner in Carroll, Iowa, called the police to report that 2 men had tried to break into his house. The victim gave investigators a description of the culprit's vehicle, and they were pulled over a few blocks away. Law enforcement faced no difficulty in confirming that the 2 men, 23-year-old Matthew Allen McNelly and 20-year-old Joey Lee Miller, had been responsible for the attempted invasion. The victim had told them the suspects had painted faces, and the police found that in lieu of more conventional disguises, the 2 men had drawn masks on their faces in permanent marker. They actually still displayed the crudely drawn black streaks in their mugshot photos. The Carroll police chief later jokingly told CNN, "We're very skilled investigators and the black faces gave them right away." He also described the incident as having the best mix of funny and weird he'd seen in over 28 years working on the force. The chief also noted that both men were intoxicated at the time and had targeted the home because one of them believed his girlfriend was having a relationship with the man who lived there. They were charged with attempted burglary, while McNally was additionally charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get mugged by a criminal who was just released from jail, or lose 10% of the funds in your bank account due to a clerical error completely out of your control? Let us know in the comments section below.